The Fog and the Invitation. The autumn of 1938 lay heavy over the English countryside like a damp woolen cloak. Mist clung to the hedgerows and turned the fields into vague shapes of grey and brown. In the distance, a church bell tolled faintly, its sound swallowed almost at once by the thickening fog. It was the sort of evening when sensible men stayed by their firesides with a glass of brandy, and tried not to think of the news from the continent. Hercule Poirot, however, was not a sensible man in the ordinary sense. He sat in the back of a discreet black motor car, his patent leather shoes placed neatly together, his gloved hands resting on the silver knob of his walking stick. The neatness of his appearance was almost defiant against the wild dampness outside. His famous moustaches, waxed to perfection, twitched slightly as the car jolted over a rutted lane. "Mon ami," he murmured to himself, "one does not drag Hercule Poirot from his comfortable flat in London to an abandoned airfield without excellent reason, or without very great danger." The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, delivered by special courier. The envelope bore no stamp, only the seal of the Air Ministry. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream paper, written in the firm hand of Air Commodore Sir Reginald Hawthorne. "My dear Poirot, I need your little grey cells. Come at once. Blackthorn Field. Tell no one. The car will collect you at 8. Reginald." Poirot had known Reginald Hawthorne for many years. They had met during the last war when the young pilot had flown daring reconnaissance missions over German lines. Poirot, then working with Belgian intelligence, had once saved the Englishman's life by exposing a traitor in their midst. Since then, a quiet friendship had existed between the dapper Belgian and the tall, weather-beaten airman. Hawthorne was not a man given to exaggeration. If he said at once, then matters were grave indeed. The motor car slowed. Through the fog, Poirot glimpsed a high-wire fence topped with barbed wire. A wooden barrier blocked the road. 2 armed guards stepped forward, their faces pale in the headlights. The driver showed papers. After a tense minute of whispered conversation and torchlight examination, the barrier rose. They drove on through the murk. The airfield appeared suddenly. A wide expanse of grass, several low buildings, and one enormous hangar, whose curved roof loomed like the back of some sleeping, prehistoric beast. A few dim blue lights glowed faintly, but most of the field was swallowed in fog. Somewhere in the distance came the low throb of an engine being tested, then silence again. The car stopped beside a small brick building marked administration. A tall figure in RAF uniform waited under the porch, collar turned up against the cold. "Poirot!" Sir Reginald Hawthorne strode forward, gripping the detective's hand with surprising strength. "Thank God you came. I was afraid the fog would turn you back." "Fog has never yet prevented Hercule Poirot from keeping an appointment with justice," replied Poirot, stepping carefully onto the damp ground. He looked up at his old friend. Hawthorne's face was lined more deeply than Poirot remembered. His eyes held the look of a man who had not slept well for many nights. "Come inside quickly," Hawthorne said, lowering his voice. "Walls have ears, even here." Inside the small office, a coal fire burned low in the grate. A kettle steamed on a side table. Hawthorne poured 2 cups of strong tea without asking. Poirot accepted his with a small nod of thanks and settled into a worn leather chair. "Now, mon ami," Poirot said, stirring his tea precisely 3 times, "you will tell me why I have been summoned to this, how do you say, ghost airfield?" Hawthorne sat heavily opposite him. "Officially, Blackthorn Field is abandoned, closed down after the last expansion at Biggin Hill. That is what the records say. In reality, it is one of the most secret experimental stations in Britain. We are testing new prototypes here. Fast reconnaissance aircraft, silent engines, at designs that could change the balance if war come. He paused, rubbing a hand across his tired eyes. Project Nightingale. That is the name of our most important work. A plane that can fly higher and faster than anything the Germans have, almost silent in operation. Dr. Elias Voss was the genius behind it. Was? Poirot's eyebrows rose. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. That is why you are here. I fear we have a traitor among us. Blueprints have gone missing. Small things at first, a page here, a calculation there. Now entire sections of the new wing design have disappeared. Voss himself grew suspicious. He came to me 2 days ago, saying he believed someone was trying to sell our secrets to Berlin. I asked him for proof. He said he would have it by tonight. Hawthorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I wanted you here before anything happened, but I fear I was too late. A sharp knock sounded on the door. A young orderly entered, saluted stiffly. Beg pardon, sir. Dr. Voss requests your presence in the main hangar at once. He says it is urgent. Hawthorne glanced at Poirot. Will you come? Naturellement, Poirot replied, rising. When a man says at once, one should listen. They stepped out into the fog again. It had grown thicker, swirling around the buildings like cigarette smoke in a closed room. Their footsteps sounded muffled on the wet grass. As they approached the huge hangar, Poirot noticed the silence. No engines now, only the soft hiss of the mist and their own breathing. 2 guards stood at the massive sliding doors. They saluted Hawthorne and pulled one door open just enough for the men to slip through. Inside, and the hangar was cavernous and dimly lit by overhead bulbs that cast long shadows. In the center stood a sleek, beautiful machine, the prototype of Project Nightingale. Its wings were swept back gracefully, its body painted a deep matte black that seemed to drink the light. The cockpit canopy was open. A small group of people waited near the aircraft. Poirot's sharp eyes took them in quickly. A glamorous woman in a fur-collared coat. A young pilot in flying gear. A stern-faced major. A middle-aged woman with intelligent eyes behind steel-rimmed spectacles. A pretty French-looking secretary. And a man in a white coat who looked distinctly uncomfortable. But it was the figure in the cockpit that drew every eye. Dr. Elias Voss sat slumped forward over the controls, his head resting on the instrument panel at an unnatural angle. One thin hand dangled outside the cockpit. Around his neck was a livid red mark, thin as a wire. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lady Evelyn Hawthorne gave a small, choked cry and pressed a gloved hand to her mouth. Captain Derek Lang swore softly under his breath. Professor Miriam Langford whispered, "My God, Elias!" Major Arthur Finch stepped forward, his face like stone. "Nobody touch anything! This is murder!" Dr. Henry Blake, the medical officer, moved closer. But even he hesitated, as though afraid to confirm what everyone already knew. Only Hercule Poirot remained perfectly calm. He took a small step forward, his eyes moving slowly over the scene. The locked hangar doors behind them, the single small ventilation shaft high in the roof, the thick fog pressing against the windows, lit the strange faint humming that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He took out a fine silk handkerchief, dabbed his moustache once, and spoke in a quiet, precise voice that somehow filled the entire hangar. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "it appears that someone has committed a most ingenious crime. A crime in a locked hangar. A crime with no weapon. A crime that on the surface seems quite impossible." He turned to Sir Reginald, whose face had gone ashen. "And now, my friend, the little grey cells must begin their work, but first, no one leaves this airfield tonight." Outside, the fog pressed closer, as if the night itself wanted to hide what had been done. Inside the hangar, the beautiful black aircraft stood silent, its dead creator still seated at its heart like a macabre pilot, ready for a flight he would never take. Shadows in the hangar. The silence inside the hangar felt heavier than the fog outside. It pressed down on the small group gathered around the sleek black prototype like an invisible hand. The only sounds were the soft hiss of a distant generator and the occasional creak of the vast metal structure settling in the night air. Hercule Poirot stood motionless for a long moment, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The body of Dr. Elias Voss remained slumped in the cockpit, one arm hanging limply over the side. The thin red mark around his neck was cruelly distinct against his pale skin. There was no sign of any weapon, no rope, no wire, nothing that could have caused such a mark. "Dr. Blake," Poirot said quietly, "if you would be so kind as to examine the body without moving it too much." The medical officer nodded, his face pale but professional. He climbed the short ladder to the cockpit and leaned in carefully. The others watched in tense silence. Lady Evelyn Hawthorne stood close to her husband, her gloved hand gripping his arm so tightly that her knuckles showed white. Captain Derek Lang shifted from foot to foot, his young face flushed with barely contained anger. Professor Miriam Langford removed her spectacles and polished them repeatedly with a handkerchief. Her intelligent eyes clouded with something that looked like grief mixed with shock. Major Arthur Finch stood like a statue, arms folded across his broad chest, while Miss Clara Duval hovered near the back, her dark eyes wide and her fingers twisting the strap of her handbag. And after a few minutes, Dr. Blake climbed down again, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. "Strangulation," he said hoarsely. "Definitely. The mark is consistent with a thin wire or cord pulled tight from behind. Death was almost instantaneous. No other obvious injuries. Time of death, I would say within the last hour, perhaps less." "Within the last hour," Poirot repeated softly. "And yet this hangar was locked from the inside. The guards outside saw no one enter or leave after Dr. Voss came in alone. Is that not correct, Major Finch?" The security chief gave a curt nod. "Correct, Monsieur Poirot. I checked the log myself. Dr. Voss entered at 8:47 p.m. The doors were secured immediately after. No one else has been inside since. The only other opening is that ventilation shaft up there." He pointed to a small grated opening high in the roof, barely large enough for a cat. "Impossible for a man. Impossible," Poirot murmured. "How I dislike that word. It so often precedes a clever piece of wickedness." He began to move slowly around the aircraft, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the concrete floor. He examined the cockpit from every angle without touching anything. His gaze lingered on the instrument panel. On the way Voss's head rested at that unnatural angle, on the single small drop of oil glistening on the leather seat beside the body. "Curious," he said, "very curious." "What is it?" Sir Reginald asked, his voice rough with strain. Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the group. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have here a classic problem. A man is dead in a locked room, or rather, a locked hangar, no weapon, and no obvious way for the murderer to enter or leave. And yet murder has been done. Therefore, one of two things must be true. Either the murderer is still among us, or the method used was so ingenious that it made the impossible possible." Lady Evelyn gave a small gasp. "You can't possibly think one of us—" "I think nothing yet, madame," Poirot said gently. "I only observe, and I observe that each of you has a reason to be here tonight, and each of you had access to Dr. Voss." He turned first to Captain Derek Lang, the young test pilot whose handsome face was now tight with barely suppressed emotion. "Captain Lang, I understand you argued with Dr. Voss earlier today. Something about the safety of this very aircraft." Lang's jaw clenched. "He called my plane a death trap. Said the new wing design would fail under stress. He wanted to delay the test flight. I told him he was being overly cautious, that we needed these planes yesterday, not next year. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're suggesting." Poirot's eyes were kind but piercing. "Anger is a very human thing, mon capitaine, especially when a man's pride and career are at stake. Flying is in your blood, is it not? The thrill, the danger, and the fear that someone might take it away from you." Lang looked away, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Poirot moved on to Professor Miriam Langford. The scientist met his gaze steadily, though her fingers still twisted the handkerchief. "Professor Langford, you worked closely with Dr. Voss on the coding systems for the navigation instruments, I believe. You were old colleagues from university days in Berlin?" A flicker of pain crossed her face. "We were. Before everything changed. Elias was brilliant, but he could be difficult, arrogant. We disagreed on many things, especially the ethical implications of what we were building. But rivalry is not murder, Monsieur Poirot." "True," Poirot said softly. "Yet old friendships can turn bitter when secrets and ambitions come between them. And you, madame, are a woman of great intelligence. Intelligence enough to devise a clever method, perhaps?" Miriam Langford's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Next was Major Arthur Finch. The military man's face remained impassive. "Major, you believe Dr. Voss might himself be a German agent. You had him watched, did you not?" "I did my duty," Finch replied stiffly. "The man was German-born. Jewish or not, he had contacts on the continent. In these times one cannot be too careful. But I would not murder a man in cold blood. I would have arrested him if I had proof." Poirot nodded. "Duty is a hard master. It can make a man do terrible things while believing he is doing right." He turned to the two women who had spoken least. "Miss Clara Duval, you are recently arrived at Blackthorn Field as Sir Reginald's secretary. Your French charm has brightened many dull military meetings, I am told. Yet your past. It is perhaps not so straightforward." Clara Duval gave a small nervous smile, her accent soft and musical. "I'm only a secretary, Monsieur Poirot. I type letters, arrange files, and try not to ask too many questions. Dr. Voss was always polite to me. I have no reason to wish him harm." "Politeness can hide many things," Poirot said gently. "And sometimes a pretty face is the best disguise for a sharp mind, or a hidden loyalty." Finally, he looked at Lady Evelyn Hawthorne. The glamorous wife of the Air Commodore stood very still, her beautiful face pale beneath carefully applied makeup. "Lady Hawthorne, you have taken a great interest in Project Nightingale. You have even met with certain gentlemen from abroad. German businessmen, I believe?" Evelyn's eyes flashed. "I support my husband's work. If that means entertaining people who might help fund or advance it, then yes. But to suggest I would betray my country or murder a man is monstrous." Poirot bowed slightly. "Passion for one's husband can lead a woman down strange paths, madame. ambition, fear for the future. These are powerful emotions. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. Poirot, this is getting us nowhere. We need to find who did this. Patience, my friend, Poirot replied. The little grey cells are working. But first, we must preserve the scene. No one touches the aircraft. The body remains where it is until the proper authorities can be summoned, though I fear the fog will delay them considerably. He paused, then added quietly, There is one more thing. Did anyone hear a strange humming sound earlier this evening? A sound not like any engine. A few heads nodded uncertainly. Professor Langford spoke up. I thought I heard something, like a low vibration coming from the walls themselves, but I dismissed it as the wind. Interesting, Poirot murmured. As the group began to disperse under Major Finch's strict instructions to return to the administration building, Poirot lingered behind with Sir Reginald, and the older man looked suddenly older, the weight of command and personal loss pressing down on him. Reginald, Poirot said softly, placing a hand on his friend's arm. There is more here than simple murder. I feel it, secrets within secrets. And someone among us is playing a very dangerous game. Hawthorne nodded, his eyes fixed on the silent black aircraft and its tragic occupant. I brought you here to prevent disaster, Poirot. Instead, disaster has already happened. Find the truth, old friend, before more blood is spilled. Outside, the fog had grown so thick that the hangar lights were mere blurred halos. Footprints in the wet grass leading away from the hangar were already beginning to fade, as though the night itself wished to erase all evidence. Poirot stood alone for a moment at the hangar door, listening, as the faint humming had returned, soft, mechanical, almost like a whisper from another world. He touched his moustache thoughtfully. Whispers in the fog. The administration building felt oppressively small after the vast emptiness of the hangar. A coal fire crackled in the grate, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the group. Tea had been brought, strong and sweet, yet most cups remained untouched. The fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, turning the glass into milky mirrors that reflected worried faces back at their owners. Hercule Poirot sat in a straight-backed chair, his legs crossed neatly, observing the subtle dance of human emotion playing out before him. He had always believed that people revealed more in silence than in speech. And tonight the silences were loud indeed, as Sir Reginald Hawthorne paced slowly near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Every few moments he would glance toward the door, as if expecting the fog to part and bring answers. Lady Evelyn sat close to the fire, her fur collar pulled high around her neck. She kept touching the pearls at her throat, a nervous habit Poirot had noted years ago when he had first met her at a London reception. Back then she had been a bright, ambitious young woman marrying a rising air officer. Now the brightness had hardened into something sharper, more desperate. Captain Derek Lang leaned against the wall, arms folded, his flying boots still muddy from the short walk across the grass. His youthful energy seemed coiled like a spring. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward Professor Miriam Langford, then away again, as though he regretted something unsaid. Miriam sat at the small table, her spectacles reflecting the firelight. She had produced a notebook and was making careful entries, but her pen moved slowly, as if her thoughts kept drifting back to the dead man in the cockpit. Once she sighed softly, a small private sound full of old regret. Major Arthur Finch stood near the door like a sentinel, his broad shoulders blocking any easy exit. His face showed the rigid discipline of a lifetime in the service, but Poirot noticed the slight tremor in his left hand when he thought no one was looking. Duty was a heavy burden when it collided with doubt. Miss Clara Duval had chosen a chair slightly apart from the others. She looked delicate and charming in the lamplight, her dark hair framing a face that could have belonged to a Parisian actress, yet her eyes were watchful. She smiled politely when anyone glanced her way, but the smile never quite reached those eyes. Dr. Henry Blake sat nearest to Poirot, twisting his medical bag strap between his fingers. The young doctor's face was still pale from the sight in the hangar. He had seen death before, of course, crashes, training accidents, but never anything so coldly deliberate. Poirot cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps," he said, "it is time we spoke more openly. Dr. Voss is dead, murdered, and since none of us can leave Blackthorn Field tonight, the fog makes travel impossible, and Major Finch has kindly doubled the guards. We must use this time wisely." He let the words settle before continuing. "Let us begin with the small things. The silver locket found clutched in Dr. Voss's hand." There was a collective intake of breath. Poirot produced the small object from his pocket, holding it delicately between thumb and forefinger. It was oval, beautifully engraved, and clearly old. I examined it briefly before we left the hangar. Inside is a photograph, a young woman with a child, taken perhaps 20 years ago in Germany. And beneath the photo, a tiny slip of paper with numbers and letters, a code, I suspect. He passed the locket to Sir Reginald, who opened it with trembling fingers. Evelyn leaned in to look, then drew back quickly, her face unreadable. "Does anyone recognize the woman in the photograph?" Poirot asked. Professor Langford leaned forward. Her voice was low. That is Elias's sister Anna, and her son. She died in 1933. Elias carried that locket everywhere. He once told me it reminded him why he fled Germany, to protect what was left of his family's memory." A soft sob escaped Lady Evelyn. She covered it quickly with a cough. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Madame, you seem moved." Evelyn lifted her chin. "Dr. Voss was a brilliant man. It is tragic, that is all." "Tragic, yes," Poirot murmured, "but perhaps there is more. The locket was in his hand when he died. Did he seize it in his final moments? Or was it placed there deliberately?" He turned next to the drop of rare oil found on the cockpit seat. "Dr. Blake, you examined it?" The doctor nodded. "It is not standard aircraft lubricant. It appears to be a specialized synthetic oil used in experimental high-altitude instruments, very rare. Only a few people on this base would have access to it." "Interesting," Poirot said. "And the humming sound several of you heard. Low, mechanical, like a device rather than an engine. Professor Langford, you are familiar with the technical aspects of Project Nightingale. Could such a sound be connected to the aircraft itself?" Miriam hesitated. "Possibly. There is a new stabilizing mechanism we were testing, a small gyroscopic unit that produces a faint harmonic vibration when activated, but it should only run when the plane's systems are powered. Yet the aircraft was not powered when we found the body," Poirot observed. "The switches were all in the off position." Captain Lang pushed himself away from the wall. "This is ridiculous. We're sitting here talking about oil drops and humming sounds while a good man lies dead. Someone strangled Voss with a wire and then vanished from a locked hangar. That's what matters." "Calm yourself, mon capitaine," Poirot said kindly. "Anger clouds the little grey cells. The method is as important as the motive. Someone went to great trouble to make this murder appear impossible. Why? Because they wished to confuse us, or because they wished to buy time. He paused, letting his eyes move slowly from face to face. Time for what, I wonder? To complete the theft of the Nightingale blueprints? To send a message to Berlin? Or simply to protect a secret that has nothing to do with espionage at all? A heavy silence fell. Miss Clara Duval spoke for the first time, her French accent soft and hesitant. Monsieur Poirot, may I ask something? Dr. Voss came to see me this afternoon. He asked me to type a private letter for him, not official. He seemed frightened. He kept looking over his shoulder. He said the letter was for his old friend in Switzerland, but he tore it up before I could finish. He said it was too dangerous. Too dangerous, Poirot repeated. And what did this letter contain, mademoiselle? I don't know. He only dictated the first few lines, something about the shadow in the tunnel and the price of silence. Then he stopped and burned the paper himself in the ashtray. Major Finch's head snapped up. Tunnel? What tunnel? Clara shrugged delicately. I don't know, Major. He seemed confused. Or perhaps he was warning someone. Poirot's moustache twitched. A tunnel. The word lingered in the air like the fog outside. Sir Reginald rubbed his forehead wearily. There are old service tunnels beneath parts of the airfield, built during the last war for ammunition storage. Most are sealed. But perhaps someone has been using them, Poirot finished quietly. An underground passage that bypasses the locked doors. A clever way to come and go unseen. He rose and walked to the window, peering into the swirling grey. Footprints outside the hangar had already vanished, swallowed by the damp earth and thickening mist. Someone walked through that fog tonight, he said. Someone who knew the airfield well. Someone who knew Dr. Voss's habits. Someone who understood the prototype well enough to use its own technology against its creator. He turned back to the group, his voice gentle yet firm. Each of you carries a burden tonight. Regret, fear, ambition, love, hate. These are very human things. Murder is also a very human thing, born from passion or desperation when ordinary paths are closed. Lady Evelyn suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly. I can't bear this, she said, her voice trembling. Sitting here while that poor man lies cold in the hangar. Reginald, please, can't we do something? Her husband moved to her side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. For a moment, the mask of the Air Commodore slipped, and Poirot saw only a tired, worried husband trying to comfort his wife. Poirot watched them closely. There was real affection there, but also strain, the kind that came from shared secrets or unspoken fears. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 11. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. Tonight we can do little more, Poirot said. The fog has trapped us all. Tomorrow, when light comes, if it comes, we will examine the hangar again, the tunnels, if they exist, and the personal belongings of Dr. Voss. For now, I suggest everyone try to rest, but remember, he raised one finger, his eyes serious. No one is to leave the main buildings without my knowledge, and no one is to approach the hangar alone. As the group began to disperse to their assigned rooms in the small officers' quarters attached to the administration block, Poirot remained by the fire with Sir Reginald. Old friend, he said quietly, there is great sadness here. I feel it like a weight. Someone in this place is carrying a terrible secret, and secrets, like fog, have a way of choking the life out of everything they touch. Hawthorne nodded, staring into the flames. Find the truth, Poirot, before this fog lifts and the real storm begins. Outside, the fog continued to swirl, hiding footprints, hiding tunnels, hiding the quiet movements of someone who had already killed once and might kill again to protect what they had taken. In his small room later that night, Hercule Poirot sat on the edge of the narrow bed, fully dressed, listening to the silence. He touched his moustache thoughtfully. "The little grey cells are never wrong," he whispered, "but sometimes they must wait for the fog to thin before they can see clearly." The hidden path. Dawn arrived reluctantly at Blackthorn Field, pale and hesitant, as though even the sun feared to pierce the lingering fog. The mist had thinned slightly during the night, but it still hung low over the grass, turning the distant trees into ghostly silhouettes and muffling every sound. The air smelled of damp earth, engine oil, and something sharper, the metallic tang of fear that had settled over the entire airfield. Hercule Poirot had slept little. He rose early, performed his meticulous morning toilet with the same care he always did, and stood for a moment at the small window of his room, gazing toward the massive hangar. The black prototype aircraft remained inside, its dead creator still seated at the controls like a silent sentinel. The thought troubled him more than he cared to admit. There was something profoundly wrong about leaving a brilliant man in such an undignified position, yet disturbing the scene too soon could destroy vital evidence. A soft knock sounded at his door. Sir Reginald Hawthorne entered, looking as though he had aged 10 years overnight. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. "Vos Poirot," he said without preamble. "The fog is lifting just enough for us to move safely. Major Finch has men searching the perimeter, but I thought you would want to examine the hangar again before anyone else disturbs it." "Excellent, mon ami," Poirot replied, adjusting his tie with precise fingers. "And the tunnels? Have they been located?" Hawthorne nodded grimly. "There are old service tunnels beneath the eastern side of the field. Most were sealed years ago, but one section near the main hangar shows signs of recent disturbance. A padlock was forced. I have not allowed anyone inside yet." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then we shall go there first. The little grey cells tell me that last night's humming sound and the vanishing footprints may have a very earthly explanation." They stepped out into the chill morning, and the grass was heavy with dew. As they walked toward the hangar, Poirot noticed fresh footprints, several sets, leading in different directions. Some belonged to the guards making their rounds. Others were smaller, more delicate, a woman's shoes perhaps. Inside the hangar the air felt colder than outside. The prototype Nightingale stood exactly as they had left it, its sleek black lines gleaming faintly under the overhead lights. Dr. Elias Voss's body remained slumped forward, untouched. Poirot approached slowly, his expression one of deep respect mixed with professional detachment. He examined the thin red mark around the victim's neck once more. "The wire was pulled with considerable force from behind," he murmured, "yet there are no defense wounds on the hands. Dr. Voss did not struggle long. He was taken by surprise." Poirot's gaze dropped to the cockpit floor. The single drop of rare oil had dried into a small dark spot, but its presence still puzzled him. He took out a tiny envelope and carefully scraped a sample into it. "Reginald, this oil, it is not ordinary. It is used in the new altitude compensators, correct?" "Yes," Hawthorne replied. "Only Voss and Professor Langford had full access to this supply. The rest of us used standard lubricants." "Curious," Poirot said. He moved to the rear of the aircraft and ran his hand lightly along the fuselage until he found a small access panel. It was slightly ajar. Inside, a compact mechanical device was mounted, a gyroscopic stabilizer. A thin wire ran from it to a small battery pack. Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. Ah, here is our humming ghost. Has someone activated this unit remotely or with a timer? It created the low vibration we all heard. A distraction, perhaps, or a way to mask other sounds. Very clever and very modern. He straightened. The murderer used the plane's own technology against its creator. That suggests intimate knowledge of Project Nightingale. They left the hangar and walked to the eastern edge of the field, where a low concrete bunker marked the entrance to the old tunnels. The padlock had indeed been forced recently. The metal showed fresh scratches. Major Finch waited there with 2 armed guards, his face set in stern lines. "Shall I go first, sir?" Finch asked. "No," Poirot said gently. "I shall lead, but carefully, if you please." The tunnel was narrow, damp, and smelled of mildew and rust. Electric torches cut through the darkness, revealing cobwebs and old crates stacked against the walls. After 20 yards they reached a junction. One branch led towards the hangar. Another veered deeper underground. Poirot paused, shining his light on the floor. Clear footprints showed in the dust, adult shoes, size roughly matching those of a man of medium height. They led toward the hangar and back again. "Someone came this way last night," Poirot said. "After the murder, perhaps, to retrieve something, or before, to prepare the scene." Further along, they found a small side chamber. Inside lay a metal box, its lid open. Blueprints, detailed drawings of the Nightingale's wing structure, were scattered on the floor. Several pages were missing. Hawthorne swore under his breath. The designs Voss was protecting. Whoever killed him took what they wanted. Poirot knelt carefully, examining the papers without touching them. Not all are missing. Only the most critical sections, the ones dealing with the silent engine mounting and the new radar-deflecting materials. This was no random theft. This was targeted. As they emerged from the tunnel into the pale daylight, they found the rest of the group waiting near the administration building. Tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Captain Derek Lang looked ready to explode. Professor Miriam Langford stood with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes red-rimmed. Lady Evelyn clutched her husband's arm, while Miss Clara Duval hovered nearby, pale but composed. Dr. Blake shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Poirot addressed them all calmly. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have discovered a hidden path beneath the airfield, a tunnel that connects to the hangar. The murderer almost certainly used it to enter and exit without being seen. The locked doors were a clever illusion. The crime was made to appear impossible, so that we would waste time searching for a supernatural explanation instead of looking for a very human one." He held up the small envelope containing the oil sample. This rare oil was found in the cockpit. Only a few people had access to it. The humming device was taken from the aircraft itself, and now we find stolen blueprints hidden in the tunnel. The picture begins to form. Captain Lang stepped forward aggressively. "Are you accusing one of us of being a German spy?" "Not necessarily a spy," Poirot replied softly. "Perhaps someone who was desperate, someone who needed money, or someone protecting a loved one. Greed and fear make strange bedfellows." His eyes moved to Lady Evelyn. "Madame, you have entertained German businessmen recently. Did any of them show particular interest in aviation projects?" Evelyn's face flushed. "That was social, nothing more. Reginald knows everything." "Does he?" Poirot asked gently, glancing at his friend. Hawthorne looked stricken but said nothing. Professor Langford spoke suddenly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Elias was my friend once. We shared dreams of building something beautiful that would help humanity, not destroy it. But the world changed. He changed. He became obsessed with making the Nightingale perfect, even if it meant cutting corners on safety. Derek argued with him about that yesterday. I heard them, but I swear I did not kill him. Tears welled in her eyes, and the brilliant scientist suddenly looked very human, vulnerable and grieving. Miss Clara Duval wiped her eyes delicately with a lace handkerchief. Dr. Voss was kind to me. He reminded me of my father back in Lyon. I would never harm him. Poirot nodded kindly. Grief is natural, mademoiselle, but sometimes grief hides guilt. He turned to the entire group. Today we will search every room, every personal belonging. No one is above suspicion. And tonight, when the fog returns, as I fear it will, we will gather again. The truth is close. I feel it. Someone among us is carrying the weight of murder on their conscience. And conscience, my friends, is a heavy burden indeed. As the group dispersed under Major Finch's watchful eye to prepare for the searches, Poirot walked slowly beside Sir Reginald. The older man's shoulders were bowed. "Oh, Poirot," he said quietly, "if it is someone close to me, if it is Evelyn." He could not finish the sentence. Poirot placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Friendship sometimes requires painful truths, mon ami. But justice must be served. For Dr. Voss, for Britain, and for the shadows that war is already casting over all of us." In the distance, the fog began to thicken once more, rolling in from the fields like an advancing army. Blackthorn Field seemed to shrink under its weight, trapping its inhabitants with their secrets, their fears, and the growing certainty that one of them was a killer. And somewhere in the mist, the stolen secrets of Project Nightingale waited to be passed to hands that would use them for darkness rather than light. The weight of secrets. By midday, the fog had returned in full force, to wrapping Blackthorn Field in a damp, suffocating embrace. The search of the rooms had begun under the strict supervision of Major Arthur Finch and 2 armed guards. Hercule Poirot moved quietly among the group, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He did not conduct the searches himself, that was left to the efficient military hands, but he observed every reaction, every flicker of unease, every too quick smile or averted gaze. The administration building had been turned into a temporary centre of operations. Personal belongings were laid out on long tables in the main hall. Letters, notebooks, small personal items, and in some cases, hidden photographs or scraps of paper. The atmosphere was thick with humiliation and resentment. Captain Derek Lang stood stiffly while his flying kit was examined. A small silver flask was discovered in his jacket pocket, along with a crumpled letter from a girl in London who begged him not to take unnecessary risks. Lang's face reddened when the letter was read aloud. "It's private," he snapped. "Nothing to do with Voss." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "Love makes a young man reckless, mon capitaine. And fear of losing one's place in the sky can make him desperate. Did Dr. Voss's doubts about the Nightingale threaten your chance to be the first to fly her?" Lang looked away, his jaw working. "I wanted to prove him wrong, that's all. I didn't kill him for it." Professor Miriam Langford's room yielded more interesting results. Among her papers was a bundle of old correspondence with Dr. Voss from their university days in Berlin. One letter, dated 1932, bespoke of shared dreams for a better world, and ended with the words, "whatever the cost." Miriam's hands trembled as Major Finch held it up. "We were young and foolish," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "We believed science could rise above politics. Then Hitler came. Elias lost his family. I lost my illusions, but that letter means nothing now. We argued often in recent weeks. He wanted to push the project faster. I warned him the new stabilizer was unstable. He called me a coward. Tears slipped down her cheeks. For the first time, the brilliant cryptographer looked like an ordinary woman carrying the weight of old love and new regret. Lady Evelyn Hawthorne's suite revealed a small locked diary. When opened, it contained entries about meetings with foreign gentlemen interested in aviation. One entry, dated only a week earlier, read, "R must never know how much we need the money. The Nightingale could solve everything." Evelyn sat very still, her face pale, refusing to explain. Sister Reginald stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, but his eyes held deep pain. Poirot noticed how the Air Commodore's fingers tightened whenever his wife's name was mentioned in connection with the missing blueprints. Miss Clara Duval's belongings were modest. A few elegant dresses, a bottle of French perfume, and a small photograph of an older man in a French army uniform. Tucked inside her passport was a train ticket to Dover, dated for the following week, a departure she had not mentioned to anyone. "I was planning to visit my mother," she explained softly, her accent more pronounced under stress. "She is ill. Dr. Voss knew. He even offered to help with the fare. He was a kind man." Dr. Henry Blake's medical bag contained the usual instruments, but also a small vial of sedative. When questioned, he admitted he had given Dr. Voss a mild sleeping draught 2 nights earlier, because the engineer had been suffering from severe insomnia. "He was worried about espionage," Blake said. "He kept saying someone was watching him. I thought it was paranoia from overwork. Now I wonder if he was right." As the searches continued, Poirot gathered small items for closer examination. The silver locket with its hidden code still puzzled him. He spent several minutes studying the tiny slip of paper inside, copying the sequence of numbers and letters into his notebook. The code looked familiar, a simple substitution cipher perhaps, but one that might point to a contact outside the airfield. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested a private conversation with each suspect in turn in the small side office. He began with Professor Miriam Langford. She sat opposite him, twisting her handkerchief. "You loved him once, did you not?" Poirot asked gently. Miriam's eyes filled. "Yes, a long time ago, before the world went mad. We were going to change aviation together. Then he married his work, and I buried myself in codes and ciphers. When he came to Britain, I was glad to work with him again. But he had grown hard, suspicious. He accused me of slowing the project deliberately. Last week we had a terrible row. I told him his obsession would get someone killed." She looked down. "And now it has. But not by my hand, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it." Poirot nodded kindly. "Grief speaks truth, madame. Thank you." Captain Derek Lang was next, still simmering with anger. "I argued with Voss, yes," he admitted. "He wanted to ground the Nightingale for more tests. I told him we didn't have time. The Germans are building faster than we are. If I'd wanted him dead, I would have challenged him to a fist fight, not strangled him like a coward in the dark." Poirot studied the young pilot's flushed face. "Pride is a dangerous companion in the sky, mon ami, and in life." Lady Evelyn came in with her husband. Sir Reginald insisted on staying, but Poirot gently asked him to wait outside. Evelyn sat gracefully, though her hands betrayed her nervousness. "You have been meeting people who could pay well for British secrets," Poirot said softly. "Was it for money or for something else?" Evelyn lifted her chin. "As my husband has given everything to the service. We have debts. The estate is mortgaged. I thought, if I could secure private funding, it would help. But I never betrayed my country, and I certainly did not kill Dr. Voss." There was defiance in her voice, but also fear. Fear of losing the man she clearly still loved. Miss Clara Duval was charming and evasive. She spoke of her father's death in the last war and her desire to help Britain. Yet when Poirot mentioned the tunnel footprints, she grew pale and claimed she had never left her room after dinner. Dr. Blake was the last. He confessed that Voss had asked him for a strong sedative on the night of the murder, saying he feared he would not sleep. Blake had refused, worried about the dosage. "He said someone was trying to silence him," Blake whispered. I thought he meant figuratively." As evening approached, Poirot sat alone in the office, arranging his notes. The fog outside had thickened again, turning the windows into blank grey screens. A soft knock sounded. Sir Reginald entered, looking utterly exhausted. "Any progress, old friend?" Poirot sighed. "Many threads, mon ami. Many emotions. Greed, love, fear, old loyalties, new betrayals. Someone here is playing a double game. The stolen blueprints are gone, yet the locket code suggests a contact waiting for delivery. The tunnel was used, but the murder itself required knowledge of the aircraft's own mechanisms." He tapped his notebook. The humming device was no accident. It was activated to cover the sound of the wire being used, or perhaps to mask footsteps in the tunnel, as the oil drop was left by someone who handled the stabilizer recently. And the locket! The locket may be the key. Hawthorne rubbed his face. "If it's Evelyn, or Derek, or Miriam, I don't know how I'll bear it. These people are my responsibility. Voss was under my protection." Poirot placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "War casts long shadows, Reginald. It makes good people do desperate things. But murder is a choice, and the one who chose it must face justice." That night, as the group gathered once more for a cold supper, the tension was almost unbearable. No one spoke much. Eyes darted suspiciously. Even the clink of cutlery sounded too loud. Poirot watched them all with quiet compassion. He saw the way Captain Lang glanced at Professor Langford with unspoken regret, and he noticed Lady Evelyn's hand seeking her husband's under the table. He observed Miss Duval's nervous smiles and Dr. Blake's restless fingers. Somewhere in this small, closed circle was a killer who had used fog, tunnel, and technology to commit what they hoped would be a perfect crime. But Hercule Poirot knew there was no such thing as a perfect crime, only imperfect human beings who left behind traces of their humanity. A drop of rare oil, a silver locket, a humming device, and the heavy, invisible weight of guilt. Outside, the fog pressed closer, as though trying to smother the truth forever. Inside, the little grey cells continued their patient, relentless work. Threads of guilt. The supper ended in uneasy silence. The fog outside had grown so dense that the windows reflected the room like dark mirrors, showing tired, restrained faces back at their owners. No one wanted to linger. One by one, the suspects excused themselves and returned to their rooms under the watchful eyes of Major Finch's guards. Only Hercule Poirot remained in the small dining area, sipping a cup of weak coffee and turning the silver locket over in his hands. Sir Reginald Hawthorne joined him, sinking into a chair with a heavy sigh. The Air Commodore looked utterly drained, the lines on his face deeper than ever. "Poirot," he said quietly, "I feel as though I am losing control of everything. My airfield, my project, my own wife. Tell me truthfully, do you suspect Evelyn?" Poirot set the locket down carefully. "I suspect everyone, mon ami, and no one. That is the burden of my work. Lady Evelyn has secrets, yes. Ambition and fear for your future have driven her to meet people she should not have met. But murder? That requires a colder heart than I see in her eyes when she looks at you." Hawthorne rubbed his temples. "She has always been ambitious. When we married, she believed I would rise quickly. Now, with war coming, she fears we will lose everything. She thought private funding could save us. I was blind to how far she might go." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Love can make even the strongest man blind, but love can also be a motive for protection rather than betrayal." A soft footstep sounded in the corridor. Professor Miriam Langford appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She had clearly been crying. "May I speak with you, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. "Alone?" Sir Reginald nodded and left them. Miriam sat down, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I have been thinking about Elias all evening," she said, her voice low and trembling. "We were more than colleagues once. We dreamed of building machines that would make war impossible, planes so advanced that no one would dare fight. Foolish dreams, perhaps. But when he came to Britain, I hoped we could recapture something of that old friendship. Instead, we fought constantly. He accused me of jealousy. I accused him of becoming as ruthless as the people he fled from." She took a shaky breath. "Yesterday afternoon, before he went to the hangar, he told me he had discovered who was stealing the designs. He said it was someone very close, someone who had access to both the technical drawings and the tunnel. He was going to confront them that night. I begged him not to go alone. He laughed and said, 'Miriam, you always worry too much.' Those were the last words he spoke to me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. If I had followed him, if I had insisted. Poirot reached across and patted her hand kindly. "Regret is a heavy burden, madame, but it does not bring the dead back. Did Dr. Voss mention any name?" "No," she whispered. "Only that the traitor used the old tunnel and knew the stabilizer mechanism well enough to activate it remotely. He said the humming would cover any noise." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "That is most helpful. The device required someone with technical knowledge, someone like you, or perhaps Captain Lang, who has flown the prototype many times." Miriam shook her head. "Derek is hot-headed, but he is not a killer. He loved the Nightingale more than anything. He would never destroy its creator." As she left, Poirot sat thinking. The threads were beginning to connect. The locket, the oil, the humming device, the tunnel, all pointed to someone who moved easily between the technical side and the personal relationships at Blackthorn Field. A few minutes later, Captain Derek Lang entered the room uninvited, his face flushed with emotion. "I know what people are saying," he burst out. "That I argued with Voss because he wanted to delay my test flight. Yes, I was angry, but I respected the man. He was brilliant. I only wanted to prove the plane was ready. If I had known someone was planning to kill him—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Last night, after supper, I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk near the hangar. The fog was so thick I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I thought I heard footsteps. Soft, quick, coming from the direction of the old bunker. I called out, but no one answered. When I reached the hangar doors, they were still locked. I told myself it was nothing." Poirot leaned forward. And the humming sound? You heard it too? Lang nodded. Yes. It started just after I left my room. Low, steady, like the stabilizer when it's testing balance. I thought someone was running unauthorized checks on the plane. Very interesting, Poirot murmured. You see, mon capitaine, the murderer needed the humming to mask the sound of the wire being used. Or perhaps the sound of the tunnel door opening. Someone who knew the aircraft intimately could have prepared everything in advance. Lang's hands clenched. If I had gone inside instead of walking away, maybe Voss would still be alive. Guilt and frustration warred on the young pilot's face. For all his bravado, he was still a man who carried the weight of what might have been. Miss Clara Duval was the last to seek Poirot that night. She slipped into the room quietly, her eyes wide and nervous. Monsieur Poirot, I am frightened, she whispered. Someone has been in my room while I was at supper. My perfume bottle was moved, and this, she held out a small scrap of paper. On it was written in block letters, Leave tonight or join Voss. Poirot examined the note carefully. The handwriting was crude, clearly disguised. Someone wishes you to run away, mademoiselle. Why? Because you know something dangerous, or because you are becoming inconvenient. Clara's lips trembled. I only typed one letter for Dr. Voss. He mentioned the shadow in the tunnel. I thought it was a code for the traitor. Now I fear the killer thinks I understood more than I did. Poirot folded the note and placed it in his pocket. Courage, mademoiselle. The fog traps us all, but it also traps the murderer. Tomorrow we will see more clearly. As Clara left, Poirot stood alone by the dying fire. The human cost of the crime weighed heavily on him. Each person at Blackthorn Field carried their own pain. Lost love, financial fear, professional rivalry, youthful pride, old loyalties. One of them had allowed that pain to twist into murder. He touched his moustache thoughtfully. The little grey cells have almost completed the pattern, he whispered to the empty room. Only one final thread remains. And when the fog lifts tomorrow, the truth will be revealed, with all its sadness and its terrible humanity. The night at Blackthorn Field passed in restless silence. Few slept soundly. The fog pressed against the windows like a living curtain, and every creak of the old building made hearts jump. Hercule Poirot lay awake for hours, his mind turning over the threads he had gathered. The locket with its hidden code, the rare oil drop, the humming stabilizer, the forced tunnel lock, and the crude warning note given to Miss Clara Duval. By early morning the mist had thinned just enough to allow movement, though visibility remained poor. Poirot requested that everyone gather once more in the main hangar. The atmosphere was heavy as the group assembled near the silent black prototype. Dr. Elias Voss's body had finally been removed to a small mortuary room under Dr. Blake's care, yet his presence still seemed to linger in the vast space. Sir Reginald Hawthorne stood beside Poirot, his face set in grim lines. Lady Evelyn remained close to him, her usual glamour dimmed by exhaustion and worry. Captain Derek Lang paced restlessly, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Professor Miriam Langford clutched a notebook to her chest as though it were a shield. Major Arthur Finch stood rigidly at attention, while Miss Clara Duval and Dr. Henry Blake hovered near the back, both looking pale and anxious. Poirot cleared his throat and began speaking in his precise, quiet voice that somehow filled the entire hangar. Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached a critical point. Last night, threads began to connect, the tunnel was used, and the stabilizer was activated deliberately to create the humming sound that masked the crime. The rare oil was left by someone who handled the aircraft's mechanisms recently. And the silver locket clutched in Dr. Voss's hand contains both a personal photograph and a code that points to a contact waiting for the stolen blueprints. He paused, letting his words sink in. Dr. Voss knew the traitor was someone close. He planned to confront that person here in this hangar on the night he died. Instead, the traitor struck first, using the very technology Voss had created to make the murder appear impossible. Captain Lang interrupted, his voice tight. "Then who is it? Stop dancing around and name the killer." Poirot raised a hand calmly. "Patience, mon capitaine. The little grey cells require order. Let us examine motives and opportunities one by one." He turned first to Lady Evelyn Hawthorne. "Madam, you met with foreign businessmen who showed great interest in British aviation secrets. You needed money to protect your husband's future and your own position. The diary entries prove you were desperate. Did desperation lead you into the tunnel that night?" Evelyn's face flushed with anger and fear. "I admit I was foolish. I sought funding, not treason. I never entered any tunnel, and I certainly did not kill Dr. Voss. Reginald, tell him." Sir Reginald looked torn, but he spoke steadily. "My wife has made mistakes, Poirot, but she is not a murderer." Poirot nodded gently. "We shall see." He moved on to Professor Miriam Langford. "You argued bitterly with Dr. Voss about the safety of the project, but his old feelings of love had turned to professional rivalry. You knew the stabilizer mechanism better than almost anyone. You could have activated it to cover the sound of the crime." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. "I loved him once. I would never have harmed him. My only crime was failing to stop his obsession." Next came Captain Derek Lang. "Your pride was wounded when Voss called your beloved plane unsafe. You were seen walking near the hangar that night. You admitted hearing the humming and the footsteps. Anger can turn a brave pilot into a desperate man." Lang's fists clenched. "I wanted to fly her, not destroy her creator. I'm no killer." Major Arthur Finch stepped forward stiffly. "If you are looking for duty taken too far, look at me. I suspected Voss of being a German agent. I watched him closely. But I would have arrested him openly, not strangled him in secret." Poirot's gaze softened. "Duty is noble, Major, until it blinds one to justice." He turned to Miss Clara Duval, who stood trembling. "You received a warning note last night telling you to leave or join Voss. Someone fears what you know. You typed a letter for Dr. Voss mentioning the shadow in the tunnel. You have a mysterious past and a ticket to leave the country. Fear can make even a charming secretary do terrible things." Clara shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I'm innocent. I only wanted to help my mother." Finally, Poirot looked at Dr. Henry Blake. "You were the last to see Voss alive in a meeting. You refused him a strong sedative. You had access to medical supplies that could include thin wire or cord. A doctor sees death often and learns to be clinical." Blake swallowed hard. "I swore an oath to save lives, not take them." A long silence fell. The fog outside seemed to press even closer against the hangar windows. Poirot took a small step forward, his voice growing quieter yet more intense. "All of you have secrets. All of you had opportunity. But only one of you used the tunnel, activated the stabilizer, left the oil drop, and placed the locket in Voss's hand as a final cruel touch, perhaps to throw suspicion elsewhere, or to send a hidden message." He raised the silver locket. "This code inside is not for Berlin. It is a simple message meant for someone in this room. Someone who understood its meaning immediately." Suddenly, A low humming sound began again, faint but unmistakable, coming from the prototype aircraft itself. Gasps rippled through the group. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah," he said softly, "the ghost returns. Someone has activated the device once more, perhaps to create confusion, or to silence the truth before it is spoken." Major Finch moved toward the plane, but Poirot stopped him with a raised hand. "No one touch anything. The storm is gathering, mesdames et messieurs. When the fog finally lifts, the killer will be revealed, and with the revelation will come great sadness, for the crime was born not from pure evil, but from very human weakness, greed, and fear." The humming continued, low and steady, like a heartbeat in the vast, cold hangar. Outside, the fog swirled thicker than ever, as though nature itself held its breath, waiting for the final act. The second humming, the low, mechanical humming, filled the hangar like an unwelcome ghost, a steady and insistent. It seemed to come from deep within the black prototype itself, vibrating through the metal frame and echoing off the curved walls. Several members of the group instinctively stepped backward, their faces pale in the dim overhead lights. Hercule Poirot remained perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as he listened. His sharp eyes moved from the aircraft to the faces around him, noting every reaction with clinical precision. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting. Someone among us has activated the stabilizer once again. Not to mask a murder this time, but perhaps to create panic, or to drown out words that should not be spoken." Major Arthur Finch moved forward, his hand reaching for the aircraft's access panel. "I'll shut it down immediately." "No!" Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. "Do not touch it. Major, the device is part of the evidence now. Whoever started it knows we are close to the truth. This is their last attempt to confuse us." The humming continued, a constant low drone that set teeth on edge. Lady Evelyn Hawthorne clutched her husband's arm tighter, her knuckles white. "Make it stop, Reginald, please. It sounds like the plane itself is alive and accusing us." Sir Reginald's face was ashen. "Poirot, for God's sake, this is unbearable." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Patience. The little grey cells thrive on discomfort. Let us use this moment wisely." He turned slowly, addressing each person in turn. "Captain Lang, you know this aircraft better than most. You have flown her in tests. Could you activate the stabilizer from outside the cockpit?" Lang shook his head, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "Oh, not without the master switch inside." Unless someone rigged a remote trigger using the tunnel wiring. Voss once mentioned experimenting with that idea for emergency testing. "Precisely," Poirot said softly. "A remote trigger. Clever. And someone here is very clever." He shifted his gaze to Professor Miriam Langford. "You understood the technical specifications better than anyone except the victim. The gyroscopic unit was your responsibility in many ways. Did you activate it just now, madame, to buy yourself a few more minutes?" Miriam's voice trembled. "I have done nothing. I want the truth as much as you do. Elias deserved better than this circus of suspicion." The humming seemed to grow slightly louder, as if in mocking response. Poirot moved closer to the aircraft, careful not to touch it, if he examined the access panel again. A tiny red indicator light glowed faintly, confirmation that the device was indeed running on battery power. "Someone prepared this in advance," he observed. "A timer, perhaps, or a simple radio signal. The same person who used it on the night of the murder. The oil drop in the cockpit matches the lubricant used on this very unit. The murderer's hands were stained with it." He turned to Miss Clara Duval, who stood trembling near Dr. Blake. "Mademoiselle, the warning note you received last night, leave tonight or join Voss. It was written by someone who fears you know too much about the tunnel. You mentioned Dr. Voss spoke of the shadow in the tunnel. Did he ever say more? A name, perhaps?" Clara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "He only said the shadow was closer than anyone thought. Someone who smiled by day and betrayed by night. I thought he was speaking in riddles because he was afraid." Dr. Henry Blake cleared his throat nervously. "The sedative, I refused him. He said he needed it because the shadow never slept. I should have listened." The humming droned on, relentless. Poirot raised the silver locket once more, holding it up so the light caught its engraved surface. "This locket was in Dr. Voss's hand when he died. Inside, besides the photograph of his sister and nephew, is a code, a simple substitution cipher. I decoded it this morning. It reads, 'EH knows the tunnel. Stop her before blueprints reach Berlin.'" A collective gasp rippled through the group. Lady Evelyn staggered back as though struck. "That's monstrous! I never—" "EH," Poirot continued calmly. "Evelyn Hawthorne. And the code was meant as a warning from Voss to someone he trusted. Perhaps to Professor Langford, or even to Sir Reginald himself. But the murderer found the locket and placed it in the victim's hand deliberately, hoping it would point suspicion in the wrong direction, or perhaps as a final act of cruelty." Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse. "Poirot, if this is true—" "It is not the whole truth," Poirot said gently. "The code was written before the murder. Dr. Voss suspected Lady Evelyn of passing information, but suspicion is not proof, and the real killer knew about this suspicion and used it." The humming suddenly changed pitch. A higher, more urgent tone. Major Finch's face darkened. "This is intolerable. I demand we shut it down and search everyone again." Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. The device is telling us something. It runs on a timer connected to the battery. When the power drops below a certain level, the pitch changes. We have perhaps 10 minutes before it stops completely." He looked at each face with deep compassion mixed with steel. 10 minutes, mesdames et messieurs. 10 minutes in which the killer must decide whether to confess or allow another tragedy. Because if the humming stops without the truth being spoken, I fear the murderer may try to silence one more witness. Tension crackled in the air, thicker than the fog outside. Captain Lang's hands were balled into fists. Professor Langford looked ready to faint. Lady Evelyn wept openly now, while her husband stood frozen between duty and love. Miss Duval clutched Dr. Blake's sleeve, and the doctor himself appeared on the verge of collapse. Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper, and yet it cut through the humming like a knife. "The little grey cells have nearly finished their work. The pattern is almost complete. One final piece remains. When the humming ceases, so too will the lies." The pitch rose again, a shrill warning note that seemed to echo the growing storm of emotion in the locked hangar. Outside, the fog swirled madly, as though the world itself waited for the breaking point. The final thread, the humming inside the hangar, rose to a shrill, almost painful pitch, like a mechanical scream echoing off the metal walls. The red indicator light on the stabilizer unit flickered erratically. Everyone stood frozen, eyes fixed on the sleek black prototype and the small group surrounding it. The fog outside pressed against the high windows, turning the vast space into a sealed tomb of suspicion and fear. Hercule Poirot raised his hand for silence, though the humming made true quiet impossible. His voice remained steady and precise, cutting through the noise with calm authority. Mesdames et messieurs, the time for half-truths has ended. The device is about to fail. When it does, the murderer will have no more distractions, no more fog to hide behind, no more clever mechanical tricks, only the truth. He turned slowly, his eyes resting on each face with deep, almost paternal understanding. Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, you met with German contacts. You needed money desperately. Dr. Voss suspected you and left the coded warning in the locket, but you did not kill him. Your hands are stained with ambition, not blood. You walked in the fog that night, yes, but only to meet a contact who never came. You returned frightened and silent. Evelyn sobbed openly now, burying her face in her husband's chest. Sir Reginald held her tightly, his own eyes glistening with relief and pain. Poirot continued without pause. Captain Derek Lang, you were angry with Dr. Voss. You walked near the hangar. You heard the humming and the footsteps. But your pride would never allow you to strangle a man in the dark like a coward. You are a pilot. You face danger in the open sky, not in shadows. Lang exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping as the weight of accusation lifted slightly. Professor Miriam Langford, you loved Dr. Voss once. You argued with him about safety and ethics. You knew the technical details better than most, yet your grief is real. The tears you shed are not those of a murderer, but of a woman who lost an old friend and a shared dream. Miriam pressed a hand to her mouth, fresh tears falling. Poirot's gaze moved on. Major Arthur Finch, duty is your religion. You suspected Dr. Voss of being a spy and watched him closely. But you are a soldier, not an assassin. You would have arrested him in daylight, with proper procedure, not used a wire in a locked hangar. Finch gave a stiff nod, his rigid posture relaxing a fraction. Miss Clara Duval, you are charming and mysterious. You typed the letter mentioning the shadow in the tunnel. You received a warning note, but your fear is genuine. You are running from your own past, not from a crime you committed here. Clara's lips trembled with gratitude and lingering terror. Finally, Poirot turned to Dr. Henry Blake. The young medical officer stood very still, his face pale, our hands clasped tightly in front of him. And you, Doctor. You were the last to speak with Dr. Voss in a private meeting. You refused him a strong sedative because you feared the dosage. You had access to medical supplies, thin surgical wire among them. You knew the human body and how easily life can be extinguished. You had the clinical detachment necessary for such a cold act. Blake's eyes widened. Monsieur Poirot, you can't possibly think. The humming suddenly spiked, then began to fade rapidly. The red light dimmed. Poirot raised his voice slightly to be heard over the dying sound. You see, the murderer needed two things: intimate knowledge of the aircraft's stabilizer to create the distraction, and a way to enter and leave the locked hangar undetected. The tunnel provided the path, but only one person had both the medical background to use surgical wire cleanly and the opportunity to plant the locket as a false clue pointing toward Lady Evelyn. The humming gave one final, weak groan and then fell silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. Poirot took one step closer to Dr. Henry Blake. You, Doctor, treated Dr. Voss for insomnia. You knew his habits. You knew he would go to the hangar alone that night to confront the person he suspected. You followed him through the tunnel. You activated the stabilizer remotely, using a simple timer you had prepared earlier. The same timer that just ran out now. You waited for the humming to mask your movements, slipped behind him in the cockpit, and used a length of surgical wire from your bag. Quick, clean, silent. and then you placed the locket in his hand to cast suspicion on Lady Evelyn, hoping we would believe she was the German contact." Blake's face had gone deathly white. Sweat trickled down his temple. That is insane," he whispered. "I am a doctor. I save lives." "Yet you took one," Poirot said sadly. "Why?" "Because Dr. Voss discovered you were the real double agent. Not a loud German spy, but a quiet Englishman who had been selling secrets for money. Money to pay gambling debts, I suspect, or to support a lifestyle your medical salary could not afford. Voss confronted you that afternoon. You realized he would expose you that night, so you killed him first." Blake backed away slowly, his eyes darting towards the hangar doors. "You have no proof," he said hoarsely. "I have the surgical wire missing from your bag. Major Finch confirmed it during the search. I have your fingerprints on the stabilizer access panel, left when you prepared the timer, and I have the rare oil on your coat cuff, the same oil that dripped in the cockpit when you leaned over the body." Blake's shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him in an instant. I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered, voice breaking. "The money, the pressure. Voss said he would ruin me. I panicked." A heavy, sorrowful silence fell over the hangar. Poirot looked at the broken man with genuine pity. "Human weakness, Doctor. Greed and fear, the oldest motives in the world. You used clever science to commit an old crime. But in the end, the little grey cells see through every trick." Sir Reginald stepped forward, his voice heavy with command. "Major Finch, place Dr. Blake under arrest." As Finch moved to restrain the doctor, Blake gave one last desperate look at the group. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I truly am." Outside, the fog finally began to lift, pale sunlight piercing through for the first time in days. The shadows in the hangar seemed to retreat with it. But the sadness remained, the melancholy knowledge that even brilliant minds and trusted colleagues could fall when human greed overcame decency. The lifting fog, the silence that followed. Dr. Henry Blake's confession was profound. It seemed to fill every corner of the vast hangar, heavier than the fog that had trapped them all for 2 long days. Major Arthur Finch stepped forward and placed a firm hand on the doctor's shoulder. Blake offered no resistance. His head hung low, and the clever mask of the helpful medical officer shattered completely. "I never wanted anyone to die," Blake whispered again, his voice raw. "Voss found out I had been copying the blueprints. Small pieces at first, then more. The Germans offered enough money to clear my debts and more. When he confronted me, I panicked. The tunnel was already there. The stabilizer trick was easy. I had helped Voss test it. The wire, it was quick. I thought the locked hangar and the fog would protect me." Sir Reginald Hawthorne looked at the young doctor with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You were trusted, Blake. You took an oath, and you betrayed everything this country is preparing to defend." Blake gave a hollow laugh. "Defend? We're all rushing toward another war. I thought, if I helped the other side, perhaps it would balance things. Make them hesitate. Foolish, I know." Hercule Poirot watched the scene with quiet sadness. He had seen such confessions many times. The moment when the mask fell, and the ordinary human being beneath stood revealed, flawed and broken. There was no triumph in his expression, only the gentle melancholy that always accompanied the solving of a murder. "Greed and fear, Doctor," he said softly. "They are poor counselors. You used great cleverness. The remote timer, the humming distraction, The false clue with the locket. Yet you left traces of your humanity everywhere. The drop of rare oil from your own hands. The surgical wire only a doctor would choose. The footprints in the tunnel that matched your shoes. Even the warning note to Miss Duval, written in haste because you feared she might remember too much from the letter she typed for Voss. Blake looked up, his eyes dull. You really did see it all? No, Poirot replied. Not all at once. The little grey cells worked slowly, as they must. But in the end they always see the pattern. Human patterns. Not perfect crimes, only imperfect people. Lady Evelyn Hawthorne stepped forward, still leaning on her husband's arm. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was dignity in her voice now. I was foolish, Monsieur Poirot. I met those men for money, yes, but I never sold secrets. I was terrified when I saw the code in the locket. I thought Reginald would believe I was the traitor. Sir Reginald pulled her closer. We have both made mistakes, my dear, but we are still here, edged still together. Captain Derek Lang let out a long breath and looked at Professor Miriam Langford. I'm sorry for the things I said to Voss. He was right about the wing stress. I was too eager to fly. Miriam smiled sadly through her tears. He would have forgiven you, Derek. He believed in the future of flight, even when it frightened him. Miss Clara Duval wiped her eyes. I was so scared. I thought the shadow was coming for me next. Poirot turned to the entire group, his voice warm with understanding. Mesdames et messieurs, you have all carried heavy burdens these past days. Fear, suspicion, old regrets, new ambitions. Murder does not happen in a vacuum. It grows from the small cracks in human souls. Cracks widened by war's shadow, by money, by pride, by love. Dr. Blake chose the wrong path when those cracks became too wide. But the rest of you, you chose to stand together in the end. He gestured toward the sleek black prototype that still stood silent in the center of the hangar. Project Nightingale will continue. Perhaps now with greater care and less haste. Dr. Voss's work will not be in vain. His death has reminded us all how precious knowledge is, and how dangerous when misused. Major Finch led Blake away toward the waiting guards. The doctor paused at the hangar door and looked back one last time. Tell my mother, tell her I was weak, not evil, he said quietly. Poirot nodded. I will see that the message reaches her. As Blake was taken outside, the last remnants of fog began to lift. Pale golden sunlight streamed through the high windows for the first time since Poirot's arrival. The English countryside reappeared. Green fields, distant hedgerows, and the low hills beyond. Blackthorn Field seemed to breathe again. Sir Reginald approached Poirot and extended his hand. Thank you, old friend. You came when I called, and you brought justice with you, though it brings little comfort today. Poirot shook the hand warmly. Justice rarely brings comfort, mon ami, only clarity, and sometimes a little peace for the living. Lady Evelyn joined them, her voice soft. Will you stay for a while, at least until the authorities arrive? Poirot smiled gently, touching his moustache. Alas, no. London calls. My little flat, my tisane, my routines. But I will remember you all, especially the sadness in this place. War is coming. We all feel its breath. Let this tragedy remind you to hold tightly to what is good and true. He looked once more at the beautiful black aircraft, now empty of its creator. Dr. Voss dreamed of silent flight, of machines that could protect rather than destroy. May his dream survive, even if he could not. The group stood together as Poirot walked slowly toward the hangar doors. Outside, the air was fresh and clean. The motor car that had brought him was waiting, its black paint gleaming in the returning sunlight. As he settled into the back seat, Poirot glanced back at Blackthorn Field one final time. The secret airfield, the prototype, the people whose lives had been forever changed. All of it would soon be swallowed by the greater storm gathering over Europe. He sighed deeply. Human greed, he murmured to himself. It is the same in every age. And yet, so is human courage, so is human love. The car pulled away down the rutted lane. Behind him, the fog had lifted completely, and the sky was pale blue, innocent and clear. But Hercule Poirot knew that clearer skies often preceded the darkest storms. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of many hearts, the shadows of war and human weakness would linger long after the murder at the secret airfield had been solved.